and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben, and with me is...
John Wayne. Except I'm not.
You wish. You wish, Ringo Kid. And we watched this week 1939's Stagecoach.
Yes, we did. And I'm so glad that we did. So before we get into it, can I deliver a synopsis of this cinematic delight?
Synops away.
All right. So, Stagecoach from 1939, directed by John Ford, is a classic Western that follows a diverse group of passengers traveling by stagecoach through dangerous Apache territory. Among the travelers are a disgraced Southern gentleman, a doctor with a drinking problem, a pregnant woman seeking her husband, spoiler alert, a gambler, and a woman ostracized by society. Their journey is complicated by the presence of the Ringo Kid, played by John Wayne, the Duke himself, who is an escaped outlaw seeking vengeance for his murdered family. So as tensions rise between the passengers due to their clashing personalities, prejudices, and backstories, they must band together to survive attacks from Apache warriors. The film explores themes of redemption, courage, and human connection, culminating in a thrilling showdown that cements its place as a landmark in Western cinema.
You're done. Cool.
I did it.
Cool description. Normally, like, Australians end things on like an up, and you just stayed right where you were and it tricked me. Okay, the facts. Released 1939.
That is criticism that I do not appreciate. Okay? Like, this is...
Okay, I'm sorry.
What is this? The internet? All right? Like, that's... I come here and I expect a certain level of, respect from you.
I expect certain conversational cues, and I did not receive one, okay? Movie was released in 1939, directed by John Ford, The Searchers, Grapes of Wrath, The Man Who Shot Liberty Vance, written by maybe...
See how, when it's John Ford, you can't pick, like, a bad movie. He
didn't make a bad movie. I was going through his list, which is exhaustively long, by the way. And I'm like, oh, wow, these are really just cool movies. Written by Dudley Nichols, maybe the best first name of a writer we've had. Starring, look, these old movies, they get all the actors. Claire Trevor, John Wayne, Andy Devine, John Carradine, Thomas Mitchell, Louise Platt, George Bancroft, Donald Meek, Burton Churchill, and Tim Holt. Budget of $531,374 and a box office of $1.1 million. This movie is really good. Like wildly good.
If you watched or listened last week, then you would have heard me saying this is, I think we're in for a good movie, but I also hadn't seen it. It was something where it was on my list of cinematic greats and I knew I had to get to it at some point. And I just went, it's 1939, it's black and white. Ben in particular, I'm like, I don't know if you're here for this. And then I'm like, and I haven't seen it, so I can't guarantee that everyone's correct. And then honestly, within about 10 minutes of watching this, I was like, oh, it's a winner. Like this thing, I love this thing. Like I will rewatch this movie. Now that I've seen it, I will absolutely rewatch it for sure. Probably fairly frequently, like once every few years. I had such a good time watching this movie.
There's a bias within film that new is good, and it definitely each generation, each younger generation, my new movies are better than the previous new movies because movies have evolved. That is proven wrong with this movie. This movie is innovative. This movie is entertaining. This movie is well acted. This movie is well written. This movie is well shot. It's really, really enjoyable. And for 80% of the movie, it is people traveling from one spot to another without much danger. And is just interpersonal conversation, conflict, world building, and all those sort of things. And it's just good. It is a good piece of cinema. And I think cinema is the important word there because it is craft. It is cinema. And thank you so much for picking it, because yeah, it is definitely not a movie I would have watched. It is definitely, I would have had a movie out of aversion to. I would have thought, hey man, this is going to be slow, because that's how movies were made back then. This is going to be edited weirdly, and it is, because that's how movies were made back then. The conversations are going to be like not always on point to the plot, which is true, but not in a bad way. Like this is a good movie. I'm rambling because I was so caught off guard by how much I enjoyed it. I literally texted you, which is something we don't usually do about the movie unless it's like a joke at somebody else's expense. Going, this movie's straight up good. Like this movie is straight up a good movie.
Yeah, it's something like I said, it was on my list. I knew it was a classic, and I suppose again, if you didn't watch or listen to us last time where we sort of set up what we were going to watch next time and I said why I picked it, I'll go over a couple of quick things about, I guess, its importance. The reason I really wanted to watch it, the reason it was on my list, aside from the fact that, I had heard it's a classic, it's really good, you should definitely check it out if you're a fan of cinema history, was that I knew that this was the start of two big things in Hollywood. So as a fan of Hollywood and Hollywood history, I was like, okay, well, this feels like a real watershed moment. Like, so it's not the first collaboration between director John Ford and star John Wayne, but it is a few firsts for both of them in the sense that this is the first time that they work together with John Wayne in the leading man role, really carrying sort of the main story of the film. And there's a bit of a story behind that, which I think is interesting as well, which we'll probably get to. And it's also the first time that the two of them were doing a Western. It's their first Western together in the era of films with dialogue. So now the thing with John Ford as director is he was so prolific. He was doing heaps of work in the silent film era as well. Like at one point he was doing as many as, more than 10 films a year. And a lot of them are lost now. You can't find them anymore. You can find bits of them. But as we sort of moved into talkies, if you like, or films with dialogue, yeah, this was really the start of a revival of the Western genre in the talkies. It wasn't popular at that time. And then this movie comes out and it kind of relaunched it. And then it stayed there in a huge popular sphere for the next like 50 years. And of course, that combo of it's a Western with John Wayne in the lead and John Ford directing was just like this match that sort of, I feel like it really kicked off here. Like, again, like I said, you can point to little things to say, oh, well, they worked together over here before, they worked together over here before. But this was kind of a big one. It was a launching point. It was a real change for their collaboration.
I read it multiple ways people describe this film, and they're saying exactly what you're saying. But I like the phrasing of like it was an adult western, like it was a kind of a leap up in story, in content, in context for this genre. Because before in the silent film era, it was a lot of just cowboys and apologize for the term, it's just the term that was used at the time, shooting Indians. And, and stunts of, which we do see in this movie, of horse drags and things like that. But the actual content of the film wasn't really complex, where this is a complex film. This deals with complex issues and moralities and kind of interpersonal relationships, which you can really only get in a talking cinema, because it's not a mime, it's not accompanied by Nickelodeon and screen interstitials and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it's like it was a coming of age of Western cinema. It was this like it was the start of that era's version of comic book films. It was almost its Iron Man. It was like, hey, we've done this thing before, but this is how it's done. And it spawned an industry that churned out really fast made movies, because what they got really good at is making those movies. It was an industry. They went from film to film, the same stunt people, the same horse people, the same cinematographers, the same crews. And they created this like factory of films that kind of created a renaissance. And it is fascinating.
And it's yeah, so putting all that together, like this sort of becomes, I guess, an important film, and it's something where if you look at the billing for the film, I think that was what I was sort of alluding to before as well, which was John Ford reportedly really wanted John Wayne as, the Ringo Kid, if you like, in the film, who is the male lead. And really, that is who you would expect to have top billing in the film. But no one knew who John Wayne was at the time. He'd been acting, but he was not leading man material, if you like, in a high profile kind of way. So John Ford had to compromise in order to get the studio to accept John Wayne in the role. They actually gave top billing to Claire Trevor
Yeah.
as Dallas. So John Wayne has second billing in this movie, and obviously that in a Western would never happen again after this point. So, but it shows that John Ford believed in John Wayne as a presence and as a leading man and in this type of role, and his instincts were 100% correct. So I think that was really telling, that Ford was so confident that this is our guy, that he sort of went to those lengths to make sure he had that role in the movie.
It was also an era where I mean, it happens today, obviously, but more than ever, a movie was sold on its lead rather than its content.
Mm.
Like, you went to see, eventually, a John Wayne film. You didn't say Western, you didn't say the director, you said a John Wayne film. And, Claire Trevor was the person they had. She was famous from radio before this. She was, in films and TV and all sorts of things later on. But she was like the name. While we're talking about actors, a lot of people kind of dismiss acting from this era because it was a transitional era. It was an era where the acting was much larger than it needed to be on the screen at times, because they were coming from radio, they were coming from stage, they were coming from vaudeville. And so those acting techniques came across, and what you would call the softening of screen acting hadn't really occurred. But I'd like to shout out in this film Thomas Mitchell, who played Doc Boone.
Mm.
I genuinely loved some of his moments in this film. Like, obviously they're still over the top and they're still large because he's playing a drunkard and a doctor and a swindler. But the moments where he goes serious, where he has to focus, where he has to do the right thing amongst these other group, which maybe someone else should have stood up in those moments, I think are really well acted, are really nuanced, and are really enjoyable. Um, you know, I also, yeah, I don't know, something about his characterization really caught me and really sucked me into the screen.
Yeah, he was great. And it's a character that would be very difficult to do these days. The
Yeah,
idea of functionally the lovable drunk archetype, which obviously the more research that was done throughout history on drinking and its effects, the lovable drunk archetype went away, right? People found, okay, well, we now have more information. This is no longer appropriate as something to be making light of. So at the same time, as I was watching it, I was like, yeah, you don't see this kind of character anymore. So, but at the same time, this character was a type of character that we used to see a lot. And obviously, for a performer, a very fun character to portray. And as you say, there's a lot of nuance in this one. It has its big, broad moments, and then it has these moments of quiet and these moments of stillness as well, which I do think I agree completely with you that they work perfectly together in tandem.
and I think because that happens in this film with that character, you don't just get the buffoon, you don't just get the fun drunk. You do see the darkness that's kind of like, he knows, right? Like,
Yes.
he knows that he's a problematic. He knows that he's a shadow of what he should be. And when he steps out of that shadow for the moment that he can, he shows himself, the audience, and his fellow stagecoach passengers that, hey, he used to be something. He used to
Yeah.
be someone who was good at what he did. And it's quite a nice moment in this film.
Yeah. I like all of the characters. I do think Claire Trevor was excellent as Dallas as
Oh, so
well.
good.
this woman who wants something more out of life than what she's got, and obviously the promise of what Ringo is offering to her, and is this real or is this not? And that is a very interesting thing for her to play throughout the entire film. And also that whole notion that throughout the whole movie, everyone judges her. They judge her at the start, they judge her at the middle, and then it is only at the very end, after she has proven time and time again that, she is a person, rather than this prejudice that they have assigned to her, do the other characters start to come around. And of course, our hero doesn't care, because he's our hero and he gets it straight away. Do you know what I mean? That it's who's the person, right? Rather than the prejudice, which I think, again, it's 1939. This is the sort of stuff we were not commonly seeing on our screens. You think, well, that's a very contemporary kind of,
View.
view or plot point that we could sort of look at there. So, look a little bit on John Wayne, because John
Excuse
Wayne,
me, excuse me. You mean Marion Robert Morrison?
let's just say the Duke, right? So, a little bit on John Wayne. So, this was a classic John Wayne performance at a time when audiences didn't know what a classic John Wayne performance was. So, he really does arrive fully formed, I think, in this movie. And one thing that, if we look at sort of the arc of cinema history, if you like, one thing I love that John Ford does in this film is the introduction of John Wayne. John Wayne gets a super contemporary push into a zoomed close up. It's not actually a zoom, it's just a push, but still, it's a super contemporary camera move, and it is reserved for the Duke. When he arrives on the scene, he gets this very special push into close up, and it's awesome, because literally that is our signal that John Wayne is here, and he would stay there for the rest of his life, in terms of being up on that silver screen. So I do feel like this is just an exciting performance. This is an exciting introduction for John Wayne. And the character is a classic John Wayne character. He is virtuous, he is noble, he is somehow also an outlaw, even though he is
He's
all of those things.
eminently capable. Like
Exactly.
classic John Wayne, almost superhero-esque. Like no matter the situation, he has an ability in that situation. Yeah, so just before we jump off John Wayne, I grew up with John Wayne films. My grandfather and my dad both loved them. The Alamo, The Searchers, these are movies that I've seen multiple times, or at least parts of. Because this also started something for me in films that I continue to this day, in that I don't often rewatch whole films. I will go back and watch parts of films because I'm like, I want to see that bit again. And that started with probably The Alamo. Because the first two-thirds of The Alamo to a child, super boring. Quite like political and Mexico secessionists and all this sort of stuff, and the fort and all that. But the end of it is action packed and gunfighting and sad, but not to a kid, just fighting. So I would go back and rewatch the end of the Alamo multiple times in a row because that was the bit I really loved. And it's actually a behavior I've continued into my adult life. I did it as recently as I can think of, with the latest Deadpool movie. I'm like, that was all right. I just want to watch the bit where they reveal the other guys and then go on the adventure bit and then stop after the end, before the ending. Like, so yeah, it's kind of that kind of the way I consume film. I believe has been indirectly influenced by John Wayne.
Yeah. Nice. I knew you were sort of in that zone because of your, father in particular, and then you're saying grandfather as well. So yeah, I love hearing that perspective. I want to talk about stunts.
I've got two things I want to bring up about this. Right, one of them I don't think is super obvious, but you'll have more, so I just want to go first. The entry of the stagecoach crossing into the river. The camera has to have been either handheld or mounted on top of the stagecoach, because you get this wobble and unstabilization that you do not see in this era of film. It is a wild shot. The second thing I want to bring up is the Apache who jumps on the horses and does the horse drag. It's such a classic of Western cinema, where basically they get into a position where they hold onto the front of a stagecoach or a team of horses. They drop down flat on the ground, usually on a concealed rug, and then they get this pull through where they pull under all the horses, under the stagecoach, and out the other side. It is, if done wrong, deadly, but looks so cool. But yeah, they were my two. They were my two kind of stunty cinematic moments that I loved.
Yeah. One of them I'll elaborate on a little further. Well, actually, both of them. So the gentleman you're talking about is named Yakima Kanut. Okay. So, and he was almost in a weird way, I don't want to get hyperbolic, but kind of the father of modern stunts and also stunt coordination, you
I
know?
think I've heard of him.
Yeah, so he was basically, he started in rodeo because that makes sense if you look at the era. And then, of course, films coming along, we need people to coordinate horse stuff, right? And these sorts of horse stunts. So you go to the rodeo,
Yeah,
sphere, and
you're the
that's who
expert.
you start to tap. And look, he was already fairly experienced in this before we hit Stagecoach, but Stagecoach was again a bit of a turning point for him and for this industry in terms of the way we were sort of seeing stunts and
Yeah,
what we were actually looking at. So, for instance, it was his idea to actually float that stagecoach across the river. Like he was the one responsible for coming up with that gag.
yeah,
So, because that, of course, when you look at the way the camera is positioned, as you've alluded to, and even the wide shots, it's like, well, that was done in some form for real. So I
yeah,
then went and said, okay, how are we doing this? Because that is an incredibly dangerous stunt. Now, obviously, not with the actors in the stagecoach, but even so, there is a stagecoach, there are horses, they're all tied together, they're going across this thing. They put basically a ferry cable underneath the water, and they towed it, to make sure that it held the same line as they forded the river, and then they hollowed out those logs that you see strapped to it in order to get it across. And again, his brainchild, his ideas, his coordination of Yakima Kanut. So he also does two of the most incredible, dangerous stunts you're ever going to see. One of them that you've alluded to here, which was that sort of horse drag. So the thing that's so cool about that, and the reason that sticks with you, is because it's actually all captured in one shot,
yeah. It has to have been.
which was so clever, because what it even shows you is it shows you he's on the lead horse of the stagecoach. He then, in the fiction of the film, gets shot, and he falls between the rows of the horses and then goes underneath the stagecoach. And then the camera stays with him as he stands up, which proves that it is a real person who actually did that. So he did that stunt for real. He had done it before and he would do it again. And he actually would do more complex versions of it, where he was doing things like somersaults and grabbing the stagecoach as it went past, and that sort of thing. So the version that we see in this movie isn't even his most complex version of that stunt, but it is still an incredibly dangerous one, because in order to do it, and this is what I was researching when I was like, okay, this stunt, I was like, in order to do it, he was saying, well, look, it doesn't work unless the horses are actually going flat out. If the horses are not galloping as fast as they can possibly gallop,
Not enough
then the
gaps.
whole thing actually is too tippy and doesn't hold a straight line. So instantly it's incredibly dangerous because the horses are running at a full tilt. It's not some sort of sped up kind of situation there where we're trying to make it look like they're going full tilt. They have to be going full tilt in order for it to work. Then they had to put between each row of horses a metal spacer that you wouldn't usually have in that sort of arrangement because it's dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And that keeps them far apart from each other. But again, when I say far apart, it was 3 feet, which is, not that far apart. It's about a meter for those of us, used to Australian measurements. And
The
so
correct measurements, by the way.
there you go. So he's got to fall between these horses. He's got to stay within this 1 meter or he's going to get trampled. And then he has to make sure that he tucks his arms to actually clear the stagecoach before the whole thing sort of finishes. Oh, and if the horses and the coach aren't going as fast as they can possibly move, it's not going to work. So he does this thing, and I think the real genius of it is the way that John Ford captures it all in one shot and staying with the performer as we actually do that. So, and then the second really impressive thing that he does is again what became a common Western stunt where he jumps from horse to horse,
Yeah.
this time doubling John Wayne as the horses actually, in that same sequence are galloping forward to try and get to the lead horse, and he's doing it for real. And again, the great thing about the way John Ford's capturing it is it's all in one shot, but he's pushing closer and closer as we get to the lead horse, but we're still capturing it in this way. So again, very difficult to capture for the time, but really showcasing that they did this pretty much for real, and it was incredibly sketchy and dangerous, even with the safety measures that they put in place. So Yakima Canutt, well done, and how amazing, And when I started to look at his career and the things he was known for, you fall down a YouTube rabbit hole, man, of like stuff that this man did in his lifetime. So, and I also just wanted to mention this film has been referred to as the Mad Max Fury Road of 1939, which I think is kind of genius. And I wanted to mention that
It's
as well.
kind of so true, dude. Like, oh, that's broken my brain a little bit.
Yeah, we've got these characters who have to get from A to B while being pursued, by this
One of
other
them's pregnant.
force. Yeah, exactly. And they've
Uneasy alliances. Oh my
uneasy
god.
alliances. They have to band together, right? Like so. And of course, instead of our stagecoach, we've just got cars in Mad Max.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's more action in Mad Max, and you could say the parallels might end there, but
There's also no Doof Apache, so
yeah, there's so there you go. But like, I just thought that was an apt analogy, and it
yeah.
made me laugh. And also, I thought, yeah, I love Fury Road. Maybe that's why I love Stagecoach. I love this type of sort of chase film, But yeah, look, I'm so glad we watched this. I'm so glad that it didn't just live up to my expectations; it far surpassed
Yeah,
them.
exceeded as well. Exceeded well for me.
Yeah,
Um I got three more things I want to talk about, and then we can go into what you want to. The first thing I want to talk about is the transfer to digital. What I actually really enjoyed about this film, they left the imperfections in. There were film tears. There was film degradation in certain. Not a lot. You had to kind of be looking for it, except for one that was dead center of the screen. But it kind of gave the movie kind of feel. Like it didn't feel hollow because it was how it looked at the time when it was obviously transferred into a video or a tape or a digital medium. The second thing I want to talk about is there's a character in this film that would be cut from any modern script because they contribute practically nothing. And then I want to say I'm super glad they weren't. Because for some reason, their running presence and slight gag really contributed to this film. And I'm talking about Mr. Peacock. Mr. Peacock doesn't actually serve any major plot point in this film. except to kind of give other characters a little bit of color or a little bit of flavor or a little bit of interaction. And I think he is just a wonderful kind of little gag, because the gag is no one knows who he is, no one knows his name, no one remembers his name. And in a modern film, people would look at it and go, "Oh, look, that actually doesn't contribute to moving this forward. This isn't good. Just cut that character. It's pointless." You
The
don't
only
get that
thing,
character in film very often anymore.
yeah, I'd probably argue that Peacock is perhaps the closest thing we get to an audience surrogate in this
Yes,
movie. So, of course, usually if you're going to have an audience surrogate, they're often the main character because that then obviously allows for you to,
be a
I guess,
part of the
relate to
film.
them a bit more and that sort of thing. So, so yeah, I kind of, I do maybe get why he was there if he was fulfilling
Mm.
that particular purpose. But yeah, I loved Mr. Peacock. I thought he was
Kansas
great
City,
because
Kansas.
everything that you're thinking and feeling as you actually watch Stagecoach, he's thinking and feeling too. He doesn't actually want to be there. He's the whole time he's constantly sort of saying, I don't really want to do this. I don't need to do this. Let's not do this. And then at the same time, everyone else is just like, "You'll be fine. We're going." And that is sort of his gag, if you like, as well, where it's sort of like people just he's just there. He's just along for the ride. There's nothing he can do about it because they're going from A to B. He never gets what he wants throughout the movie. um,
The other thing I want to speak about actually involves him directly, and that is the physics breaking, magic teleporting arrow. He gets shot dead on in the chest when he's sitting in the back of a stagecoach. The only way that arrow hits him is if it goes through the front of the stagecoach, misses three other people, and then hits him in the chest. It's one of those bits of movie magic from back then that they didn't have to explain because audiences weren't as savvy. But watching that moment was just jarring of like, that arrow is impossible. That came from nowhere. What the hell? That breaks physics. That's a curving arrow. That went down the side of the stagecoach, in the window, took another 90-degree turn, and then hit him.
Look, Stagecoach was the prototype for Wanted. So can we just
Curve the arrow. It is. Yeah. I just wanted to kind of, as I said, it's definitely not a criticism. It's really not. It actually, I think, even adds more to the film because you get that moment of like surprise, but then you also get that moment of, as a modern film viewer, going, "Huh? What? No? What? Oh, don't worry, it's moving now. Let's go." Um, and then, last but not least, is the character of Hatfield. Hatfield, I almost, in a modern film, I would have said, I feel like there was more written for him that was put on the cutting room floor. And I don't think that's the case in this film. I think they were just dealing in pure subtext as much as they could. And that whole like leading down the journey of, obviously he was on the losing side of the war. He still thinks of himself almost as a southern gentleman and all this sort of things. And he has this really dark moment, like really dark moment where he's contemplating, ending the life of another character in this film so that he spares them further pain because he thinks they're about to be caught by the Apaches. And that moment of conflict and darkness of this film is such a step further than the rest of this movie takes that it was kind of like, I wanted to know more about that character and what he'd seen and what he'd been through. Like, but obviously the rest of it's just done through subtext. It's just done through little conversations here and there. But yeah, it felt like there was so much more that was possibly cut out. But as I said, I don't think it was because that's not really how movies were made back then.
I also think that that character is so fascinating because clearly this is a character who, can be read two different ways. It can be read that he is maybe attempting to claw back some honor by looking after, Lucy Mallory, and it could also be read as he is a character who is functionally attempting to exploit, Lucy Mallory. And depending on the scene and depending on the performance that John Carradine is giving, you're actually constantly guessing as to his motivations, which I'm sure was completely intentional, but it makes the character very fascinating because you have this guy, and it also is one of those things where you get the idea, or at least I did when I read the film or looked at the subtext, that even he as a character isn't sure which one he's attempting every moment of the day. Do you know what I mean? He's obviously presenting himself as this gentleman to this other lady, and I think he does want to be that. But then at the same time, I think he also does want to use her as well.
Yeah.
And he is wrestling with that as a character pretty much every moment that we see him. And I think that's fascinating as well. But as you say, it's all subtext. It's all in this sort of, C to D to E plot that is just,
Yeah.
happening off to the side.
It's
And
just over here. Like,
and I just think it's fantastic, and it's a great performance to watch, and seeing that motivation change, and seeing other characters not trust what his motivations are throughout the entire proceeding, and watching that play out, I thought was great.
look, thank you so much for watching this, making us watch this film. It is, I feel more educated in cinema. I feel more kind of wide breadth of enjoyment. I'm actually planning on watching a couple more John Wayne movies over the next couple of weeks because I'm just like, I need more of this. I want to consume more from the lens I see things now. I want to look at this and go, this is so expertly constructed and put together and created, and I want to consume more of that. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Jim.
No worries. Well, I'm interested to hear what we're doing next, but before we do that, why don't you tell the good people of the interwebs where they can find us if they want to?
Hey, if you found this podcast, you realize our name is Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. And that's going to unlock 3 places that you can listen or view us: YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. Don't forget Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. Like, comment, subscribe. When you're dropping those comments, tell us movies we should watch. Tell us movies you want us to comment on. Tell us movies that you love. Because you know what? We do this because we love movies. Even when we watch a bad movie or a movie we won't enjoy, it's because we love the format and we want to share that love with you. So tell us what to watch. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at Instagram, Jim_and_Ben. And we're kicking up our TikTok again because you know what? It's alive! TikTok is Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. Okay, I had a bit of a split personality week when picking this film. I started off thinking I'll be vindictive because I didn't think I was going to like this movie. And I'm like, nah, that's not the move here because this movie was dope. But then I had a real world request. I'm not going to say the person's name, but I am going to pick their film. So someone who does listen to the podcast who wasn't comfortable commenting for some reason, you're a weirdo, they can hear me. We're going to watch another movie that is considered genre defining, another movie that is considered classic, another movie that, has led a generation of film goers into enjoying story, enjoying cinema, and enjoying fantasy. And to the person who asked me to pick this film, I will say one thing: as you wish. We are watching The Princess Bride.
Nice. Okay. Interesting. I was thinking about this film just last week, so I'm here for it. I'm here for it. And I think it is nice because this is definitely also a touchstone of
It
cinema.
is.
It's not something I've seen a lot, I would say, either. So I've seen it a few times, maybe 3 times, but certainly not recently. So yeah, The Princess Bride. Hey,
I
love it.
I watch this movie once a year.
Wow. Okay, there
Yeah.
you
So
go.
this is
Well, look,
this is new. This is not new territory.
I can't wait to watch it again. And until that time, we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a good one. Bye.